Some days I wonder why those in power can't see what you and I can plainly see. I feel a bit like the hamster in the wheel. You know, I'm running as fast as I can. I keep pointing out what's going on and I keep pointing it out and I keep pointing it out, day in and day out. And yet somehow we end up in the same position. And that's probably how many of you feel at home looking at your bank statements. You're on that hamster wheel. You just keep running faster and faster to keep up, but you're not really moving forward at all. And it was one of those days today. Power prices are going up by as much as 9% in New South Wales, 6% in South East Queensland and 5% in South Australia. Now, this is the default market offer from the Australian Energy Regulator. It's effectively the benchmark against which retailers are allowed to set their prices. There's a federal election coming in a couple of months. Anthony Albanese wants another term as Prime Minister. Never forget what he said 3 years ago.
Reducing power prices by $275.
By 2025, $275 a year.
$275 a year.
We'll get power prices down by $275 a year.
Now, far be it from me to give free advice to the coalition. I'd much rather do it for money. But here's a tip. Just start running that. Buy ad space and just run that ad nauseum into the federal election, because this is the stuff that will cut through. It is a blatant lie. These increases come into effect from January 1st, or July 1st, I should say, the next financial year. And when they do, for some people in New South Wales, their bills will have increased by $806 since Albanese came to power. It's $730 in Queensland and $628 in South Australia. So in New South Wales, you'll be paying more than $1,000 more. You're $1,000 worse off than what Albanese promised you when you take into account that $275 he said he'd give you as a discount. It's not just bad, it's diabolical. And the Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, had the gall today to say that if you're not happy with your power bill, you should do something about it. And he's somehow making that easier.
I think these figures show an important opportunity to remind Australians that you can do better and shop around for a better deal.
I mean, excuse me? He's effectively saying it is our fault that we're paying too much for power. And here's the Caped Crusader Bowen coming in to show you how to get a cheaper deal with a government website, comparison website, please. Now, the regulator charges the default offer every year. It takes into consideration the wholesale cost of electricity, the cost of moving electricity around, and compliance with government rules and regulations, and then comes up with a price that it thinks, based on those costs, is reasonable. So, of course, if the wholesale price of electricity goes up, or the cost of the infrastructure, or dealing with regulations goes up, so does the default offer. And so the obvious question is, why have these costs gone up? The Prime Minister said it has nothing to do with him.
The Australia is not separate from world movements, and what we've seen is substantial world movements in energy prices as a direct result of the long tail of COVID and supply chain issues, but also of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That has seen enormous spikes.
I mean, how many times can he trot that one out? And Chris Bowen, quell surprise, blames it on coal.
One of the reasons for this decision today is spikes caused by coal-fired power stations breaking down. Not a day in the last 2 years have we had a coal-fired power station not break down somewhere in Australia. Not talking about planned maintenance, I'm talking about unexpected breakdowns which then see energy prices spike.
This bloke is completely divorced from reality. Because yes, the unreliability of coal-fired generators has been a major contributor to price volatility in recent years. But has Bowen ever bothered to ask why? He is the reason why. We're repeatedly told that renewable energy is the cheapest form of power available, and yet prices keep going up because we're decommissioning coal and gas much faster than we're commissioning solar and wind. Now, if you're a big energy provider, an AGL or an Origin, you are going to spend your money where you can make the most money. And right now that's renewables because they're heavily subsidised. So that's where they're investing. It makes economic sense for them as a business. They exist, of course, to turn a profit. And while they're spending all this money over here on renewables, over there's no encouragement to maintain their coal plants to the highest standards because they're running at a higher and higher cost. Now, it's hardly a surprise that a natural consequence of that would be the degradation of these plants. That's why things keep going wrong and they keep going offline unannounced. I mean, why would you stump up big money to preempt issues with a power plant that you're planning to close within a decade because that's what the federal government wants for coal to go away? But by heavily subsidising and encouraging renewables so fast and effectively moving all that investment from coal to renewables, we've ended up in a situation where we don't have enough power because we can't build the renewables fast enough to keep up with the coal that we're losing. And of course, if you have a scarcity of a resource, then the cost of it goes up. It's simple market forces. And it's the removal of gas too. The Energy Market Operator's 10-year outlook update last year said that withdrawal of South Australian gas generators has increased reliability risks from 2024-25 onwards, jointly in South Australia and Victoria, because AGL walked back a plan to turn a 200-megawatt gas-fired unit at Torrens Island back on, and Engie mothballed diesel-powered generators at Port Lincoln and Millicent 3.5 years ahead of schedule. And it was the same story in their annual electricity statement of opportunity in August. South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales are facing power shortages from this summer onwards unless extra generation is brought in urgently. It's the same story again and again. Fossil fuel power goes offline because the federal government has disincentivised it. There's not enough renewable energy to replace it. You get blackouts and higher prices. And then Chris Bowen, who's helped design all of this, has the hide to say that it's coal's fault. You have companies like Nippy's, the juice maker, that said last year its power bill had more than doubled in a year, despite the fact it was using less power and had installed $1 million worth of solar panels. This is the great green dream under Bowen and Albanese. And the state governments have had to pay to clean up the mess of the feds so we can still turn the lights on. New South Wales Premier Chris Minns last year agreed to cover the losses of Origin's Eraring coal-fired power station to keep it open for another 2 years, given it provides a quarter of the state's power and was meant to close this year. The Victorian government also has agreements with Energy Australia to keep Yallourn open until mid-2028 and AGL's Loy Yang A until 2035. And the terms of those deals, by the way, are secret. But either way, you pay more because the government has gone too hard, too fast on renewables. South Australian Premier Peter Malinauskas put it well at the Bush Summit last year. He said the nonsense of the climate wars at a federal level has undermined investment and, unfortunately, it looks like it's continuing today. That, in turn, is resulting in an energy-rich country that exports power to the rest of the world, paying a higher domestic power price than the very countries that we are exporting our own energy to. And if that is not the best example of policy failure, then I'm not too sure what is. Bang on. And you know what we're exporting to the rest of the world? Coal and gas. Cheap, reliable power. Here we are strangling ourselves with sky-high power bills because we don't want to burn it so we can marginally reduce our 1.3% of global emissions. But I'll let you in on a little secret. We all live in the same world. Doesn't matter whether Australian coal and gas is burnt here or in China or in India. The emissions all spew out into the same atmosphere, the same world that we all live in, the same air that we all breathe. And while I'm quoting Labor premiers, I'll give the last word to Chris Minns. He said this last May: "I'd just like to make the point that nothing will extinguish community and popular support for this energy transition more than a massive price spike resulting in people not being able to pay their bills." Don't forget, Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese promised you a $275 cut to your power bill. Instead, they have given you an $800 hike. It is a broken promise, a huge one, and they can't be forgiven for it. And if they're returned to government in May, it will just get worse.